Where is the food? Richard Chen stood in the doorway of his kitchen, his voice echoing off walls that should have been warm with the smell of cooking. The marble countertops gleamed empty. The stove was cold. The dining room beyond held nothing but an unset table and 40 chairs arranged for guests who would find nothing to eat. His mother appeared behind him, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Richard, where is Margaret? Why is nothing prepared? Your uncle is already in the driveway. Richard did not answer. He was staring at the kitchen island where his wife had stood every morning for 25 years, preparing his breakfast, organizing his life, making everything seamless. The island was bare except for a single envelope with his name written in handwriting he knew as well as his own. His sister-in-law pushed past him and picked up the envelope before he could stop her. There is a note, she said, already tearing it open. From Margaret. The room fell silent. More family members crowded into the hallway behind them, their cheerful birthday chatter dying as they sensed something wrong. Dear Richard, his sister-in-law read aloud, her voice growing quieter with each word. As you requested 4 months ago, I am eating my own food. You made clear that I contribute nothing to this household. I have removed my nothing. Happy birthday. No one moved. Richard felt his mother's hand grip his arm, her fingers pressing hard enough to bruise. What does that mean? Eleanor Chen demanded. Richard, what did you say to your wife? But Richard could not speak. His eyes had found what lay beside the envelope. A set of house keys. 3 credit cards with her name on them. And catching the afternoon light that streamed through the window Margaret had always loved, a simple gold wedding band. The ring sat there like an accusation. Like a period at the end of a sentence he had not known he was writing. His Uncle Bernard appeared in the kitchen doorway, his jovial face falling as he surveyed the empty room. I was promised Margaret's braised pork, he said, confusion replacing his smile. She always makes the braised pork for family gatherings. It takes her 2 days. 2 days. Richard thought about that. 2 days of preparation that he had never once acknowledged. 2 days of labor that he had dismissed as nothing. Where is she? His mother asked again, her voice sharp as broken glass. Richard, where is your wife? Richard picked up the wedding ring. It was still warm from sitting in the sunlight. Or maybe that was his imagination. Maybe he wanted it to be warm because the alternative was too cold to consider. I do not know, he said finally. I do not know where she is. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. To understand how a 55th birthday celebration became an empty kitchen and a folded note, we need to go back 4 months to a morning that seemed ordinary but would change everything. The Chen mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured grounds in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. It had 7 bedrooms, a pool house, a 4-car garage, and a kitchen designed by one of the country's top architects. That kitchen was where Margaret Chen spent most of her mornings, preparing breakfast for a husband who had stopped seeing her years ago. On this particular morning, she was making his coffee exactly the way he preferred it. Strong, with precisely a 1/4 inch of cream, served in the blue ceramic mug she had bought during their 20th anniversary trip to Portugal. She had been making his coffee this way for 25 years, and in 25 years, he had never once thanked her for it. Richard walked into the kitchen at 7:15, already dressed in one of his custom suits, already absorbed in his phone. He did not look up as he sat down at the breakfast table where Margaret had laid out his preferred meal. Eggs over medium, toast with butter on only one side, fresh fruit arranged the way he liked it. Morning, he said to his phone more than to her. Good morning, Margaret replied, setting his coffee beside his plate. I was thinking about the investor dinner next month. Should I reach out to the Harrisons about their dietary restrictions, or will your assistant handle that? Richard scrolled through something on his screen, his brow furrowed. Margaret waited. She had learned patience over 25 years of marriage. She had learned that Richard operated on his own timeline, that her questions would be answered when he was ready and not before. She had learned to fill the silences with small tasks, with invisible labor, with 1,000 tiny acts of service that kept his life running smoothly. She was reaching for the coffee pot to refill his cup when he finally looked up. Something in his expression made her hands still. His face was hard in a way she had never seen before, his eyes assessing her like a balance sheet that did not add up. "Margaret," he said slowly, "we need to discuss something." She set down the coffeepot and sat across from him, her heart beating faster though she did not know why. After 25 years, she had learned to read her husband's moods like weather patterns. This one felt like a storm coming. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Nothing is wrong." Richard folded his hands on the table, a gesture she recognized from his business negotiations. "I have just been thinking about our situation. Our situation. Our arrangement. Our marriage." He said the word like it was a contract he was reconsidering. "You are 52 years old, Margaret. And I have been thinking about what you have actually accomplished in those 52 years. The words landed strangely, like stones dropped into water. Margaret felt ripples spreading through her chest, disturbing something that had been still for a long time. "I do not understand," she said carefully. "Let me be clear then." Richard leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, confident, certain of his position. "For 25 years, I have built an empire. Chen Hospitality Group owns 37 luxury hotels across 12 countries. We employ over 15,000 people. I have created something from nothing, something that will last beyond my lifetime." He paused, letting the weight of his achievements settle. "And in that same 25 years, what exactly have you built?" Margaret felt something shift inside her. A crack forming in foundations she had thought were solid. "I have supported your career," she said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled beneath the table. "I have hosted your clients, managed our household, maintained relationships that brought you business. I have been available whenever you needed me, however you needed me." Richard laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, which somehow made it worse. It was dismissive, as if her words were so insignificant they did not merit anger. "Social niceties," he said. "Anyone could do that. A hired hostess could do that. I am talking about real contribution, Margaret. Financial contribution. Career contribution. Something that actually matters. I gave up my career to support yours." Margaret heard her voice rising and forced it back down. "You asked me to be flexible. You needed me available for client dinners, for travel, for entertaining. I had a degree in hospitality management. I had offers. And you chose not to take them." Richard shrugged. "That was your decision. I never forced you to stay home." The revisionist history was so blatant that Margaret almost laughed. Almost. But there was nothing funny about the look in her husband's eyes, the calculating assessment of a man who had already made up his mind. "What are you saying, Richard?" She needed him to say it plainly. She needed to hear the words. "I am saying that I am tired." Richard's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing a business decision that had been carefully considered. "I am tired of supporting someone who contributes nothing. I am tired of paying for everything while you enjoy the benefits. From this day forward, Margaret, things are going to change." "Change how?" "You will pay your own way. You will contribute to household expenses. You will eat your own food, buy your own clothes, earn your own money." Richard picked up his coffee and took a sip, as if they were discussing something as mundane as landscaping schedules. "I have been carrying you for 25 years. I am done." The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the clock Margaret had chosen when they renovated 10 years ago. The clock Richard had said was old-fashioned but had never bothered to replace. Margaret looked at the man she had married when she was 27 years old. The man whose first office had been their dining room table. The man whose earliest clients had come because Margaret's family had connections in the hotel industry. Connections she had leveraged without ever asking for credit or acknowledgement. "Is there someone else?" she asked. The question came out before she could stop it, rising from some instinct she had been suppressing for months. The late nights. The distraction. The way he looked at his phone with a small smile that never appeared when he looked at her. Richard's jaw tightened. "Just for a second. Just long enough. Do not be dramatic," he said. "This is about fairness, not infidelity. This is about you finally growing up and taking responsibility for your own life." He stood, straightening his jacket, checking his reflection in the window. He looked satisfied with what he saw. He always did. "I have meetings all day," he said. We can discuss the details tonight. But I wanted you to understand where things stand. I am not your meal ticket anymore, Margaret. It is time you earned your place in this household. He picked up his briefcase and walked out. The front door closed with a sound that seemed to echo through the empty house. Margaret sat alone in the kitchen she had designed. The kitchen with a window that caught the morning light perfectly. The window she had insisted on because she loved watching the sunrise while she prepared breakfast for a man who had never noticed. She did not cry. That was the strange thing. She had expected tears, had braced for them, but they did not come. Instead, she felt something else rising inside her. Something cold and clear and calculating. She had been married to Richard Chen for 25 years. She had watched him build his empire from their dining room table. She had been there for every late night, every setback, every triumph. She had entertained his clients and remembered their children's names and their wedding anniversaries and their food allergies. She had made his house a home that impressed people, that made them want to do business with him, that suggested success and stability and taste. And he thought she had contributed nothing. Margaret stood slowly and walked to Richard's home office. The door was unlocked. It was always unlocked because Richard had never imagined she would enter without his permission. She sat at his desk and opened his laptop. She knew his password. He had never changed it because he had never thought she would look. It took her less than 5 minutes to find what she was looking for. The emails were with someone named Victoria Ashworth, a vice president at a competing hospitality company. They went back 14 months. 14 months of lies. 14 months of him coming home late and claiming work emergencies while he was meeting her for dinner, for drinks, for hotel rooms charged to accounts Margaret had never seen. The messages were worse than the fact of the affair. It was the words he used. The way he described Margaret. She has no idea what ambition looks like. She is too busy playing housewife to notice anything. I cannot wait until we can be together publicly. Just a few more months of pretending. You understand me in ways Margaret never could. You are my intellectual equal. Margaret read every message. She did not skim or flinch or look away. She read carefully, thoroughly, the way she had learned to read contracts when she helped Richard review his first hotel acquisition deal 23 years ago. When she was finished, she closed the laptop and placed it exactly where she had found it. She walked back to the kitchen and looked around at the life she had built. The cabinets she had chosen. The dishes she had selected. The spice organization system she had developed. Every detail of this house bore her fingerprints, yet Richard saw none of it. Margaret made a decision. She would not scream. She would not confront him. She would not beg or cry or try to win him back. She was done competing for the attention of a man who had already given it to someone else. She was going to disappear. But first, she was going to plan. She was going to be strategic. She was going to make sure that when she left on her terms, with her dignity intact and her future secure. Margaret pulled out her phone and opened her laptop. Her own laptop, the one Richard had given her 3 Christmases ago and then mocked her for barely using. She updated her resume for the first time in 25 years. She had a degree in hospitality management from a respected university. She had 25 years of experience managing client relationships, organizing events, understanding what made people feel valued and comfortable. She had skills. She had simply never been allowed to use them professionally. By the time Richard came home that night, smelling faintly of perfume that was not hers, Margaret had applied to 11 positions. "How was your day?" she asked, setting dinner on the table. Richard looked at her suspiciously, as if waiting for tears or accusations that never came. "Fine," he said. "Long meetings." "I made the salmon you like," Margaret said pleasantly. "And I have been thinking about what you said this morning." Richard's eyebrows rose. "And? You are right. I need to be more independent. I'm going to start looking seriously for work." Richard looked surprised, then pleased. "Finally," he said. "That is what I like to hear." They ate dinner in near silence, Richard scrolling through his phone with that small smile Margaret now understood. He was probably texting Victoria. Probably telling her about his unreasonable wife who had finally agreed to grow up. Let him text. Let him think he had won. Margaret smiled and cleared the dishes, already planning her next move. The job search took less time than Margaret had expected. 25 years of managing Richard's social calendar and client relationships had given her skills she had not fully recognized. She knew how to read people. She knew how to make them feel comfortable. She knew how to remember details that mattered and use them at precisely the right moment. 3 weeks after Richard's declaration, Margaret sat across from Patricia Okonkwo, the owner of the Harrington, a boutique luxury hotel that had been gaining attention for its exceptional client experience. Patricia was a striking woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had reviewed Margaret's resume with growing interest. 25 years of hospitality experience, Patricia said. But I do not see any formal employment listed. Margaret had prepared for this question. My experience has been informal but extensive, she explained. For 25 years, I managed client relationships for Chen Hospitality Group. I organized events that secured major accounts. I maintained connections with industry leaders and their families, remembering personal details that made them feel valued. Patricia's expression shifted. Chen Hospitality Group. You are Richard Chen's wife. I am, Margaret said carefully. For now. Something passed between them. An understanding that did not require elaboration. Why do you want to work here? Patricia asked. Specifically here. Specifically now. Margaret considered several answers. The polished professional response. The humble appeal. The strategic positioning. Instead, she told the truth. Because I am ready to be seen, she said. I have spent 25 years being invisible, making other people successful while receiving no credit. I am very good at what I do. I just want the chance to prove it on my own terms. Patricia studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled. I know exactly what you can do, she said. I have been to your events. The Morrison dinner 3 years ago. The industry gala you organized at the Fairmorn. Do you know why the Morrison account stayed with Chen Hospitality when they were ready to walk? Margaret shook her head. Because of you. Patricia leaned forward. Mrs. Morrison told me herself. She was going to recommend they switch providers until you spent 3 hours with her discussing her mother's funeral arrangements. You remembered that her mother had loved white roses, and you sent an arrangement to the service. That kind of attention to detail, that kind of genuine care. It is rare. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen. I want you to be my director of client relations, Patricia said. It is a new position. I am creating it specifically because I need someone who understands that hospitality is not about luxury. It is about making people feel like they matter. She slid a folder across the desk. Here is the offer. Take a few days to think about it. Margaret opened the folder. The salary made her breath catch. It was more than she had ever earned in her life. It was enough to live on. Enough to save. Enough to build a future that had nothing to do with Richard Chen. I do not need a few days, Margaret said. I accept. Patricia smiled. When can you start? Margaret thought about Richard at home, expecting her to be there when he returned. Expecting her to cook his dinner and manage his life while he spent his evenings with Victoria. Monday, Margaret said. I can start Monday. She walked out of the Harrington with the contract in her bag and a feeling she had almost forgotten. Purpose. The next 3 months were an exercise in invisibility of a different kind. Margaret had spent 25 years being invisible in her marriage. Now she used that invisibility strategically, hiding in plain sight while she built her escape. She worked her new job with dedication that surprised even herself. The skills she had developed managing Richard's life translated seamlessly to managing client relationships at the Harrington. She remembered names and preferences. She anticipated problems before they arose. She made guests feel like the hotel existed specifically for them. Within 6 weeks, Patricia promoted her to senior director. Within 2 months, she had landed 3 major accounts that competitors had been pursuing for years. You have a gift, Patricia told her during their weekly meeting. People trust you. They feel seen by you. Margaret thought about all the years Richard had dismissed that gift as nothing. Social niceties. Anyone could do it. No. Not anyone. Her. At home, she maintained the facade carefully. She told Richard she was looking for work, was interviewing, was developing leads. He barely listened, too distracted by Victoria to notice that his wife was thriving. She stopped cooking elaborate dinners, citing her job search as the reason she was too busy. Richard did not complain. He was rarely home for dinner anyway. She opened a bank account at a different institution, depositing her paychecks where Richard would never see them. Her savings grew with each deposit. She visited a lawyer, a quiet woman named Helen who specialized in divorces from wealthy spouses. "Your situation is unusual," Helen told her after reviewing the documents Margaret had brought. "Everything is in his name. The house, the cars, the investment accounts. You are not on any of the major assets." "Is that bad?" Margaret asked. "Quite the opposite." Helen smiled. "It means you owe nothing. No shared debt, no complicated untangling. You can walk away clean." Margaret felt relief wash through her. She had expected to fight for scraps. Instead, she was free. "There is something else," Margaret said. She pulled out the folder she had compiled over the past several weeks. Printouts of financial records. Screenshots of account transfers. Documentation of irregularities she had noticed when reviewing their joint accounts before removing her name. Helen's expression changed as she reviewed the materials. "Where did you get this?" "I paid attention." Margaret's voice was steady. "For 25 years, I managed our household finances. I know what normal looks like. This is not normal." Helen was quiet for a long moment. "This suggests significant financial irregularities at Chen Hospitality Group. Possibly embezzlement. Possibly fraud. I know. If this comes to light, it could mean criminal charges." Margaret nodded. "I am not going to report it. That is not my responsibility. But I wanted you to have it, in case it becomes relevant. You are protecting yourself. I am preparing for every possibility." Helen looked at her with something like respect. "You have been planning this for a while. Since the morning he told me I contributed nothing." Margaret met her eyes without flinching. "Since he told me to eat my own food. I decided that day that I would never depend on him again." She had rented a storage unit across town. Over the following weeks, she moved her belongings piece by piece. Photo albums from her family. Her mother's jewelry. The book she loved that Richard had always said cluttered the shelves. The quilt her grandmother had made, the one Richard complained was too old-fashioned for their bedroom. She replaced each item with something similar so the house still looked full. Richard noticed nothing. He never looked closely at anything in their home. It was just a backdrop for his success, a stage he barely registered. By the end of the third month, Margaret had transferred everything that mattered to her storage unit. She had signed a lease on an apartment in a quiet neighborhood across town. She had built a career that paid her well and valued her contributions. She had documentation of Richard's affair and his financial improprieties, securely stored in case she ever needed them. She was ready. All that remained was choosing the right moment to leave. The invitation arrived in Richard's email, copied to Margaret as a formality. His 55th birthday was approaching, and he wanted to celebrate in style. "I am thinking of a family gathering," Richard announced one evening, not looking up from his phone. "A proper celebration. 40 people. My mother, my brother, all the cousins. A real event." Margaret set down the book she was reading. "That is a lot of people. You have done it before." Richard waved dismissively. "The Thanksgiving when we hosted 30. The anniversary party for my parents. You know how to handle these things." "What would you like me to prepare?" Margaret asked, her voice carefully neutral. Richard finally looked at her, his expression expectant. "Everything. The braised pork my uncle loves. The dumplings my mother always asks about. That soup that takes 2 days." He smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who expected service as his due. "My birthday is going to be perfect." "Of course," Margaret said. "I will handle everything." Richard returned to his phone, satisfied. He did not see the small smile that crossed Margaret's face. He did not notice the way her eyes calculated as she looked at the calendar. His birthday was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until 40 family members would gather expecting a feast. 3 weeks until they found nothing. The final preparations happened quickly once Margaret had her timeline. She gave notice at work that she would need a few days off for a family transition. Patricia asked no questions. She had seen enough of Margaret's situation to understand without being told. She confirmed her apartment lease, scheduling move-in for 2 days before the party. She prepared her note, writing and rewriting until the words were perfect. Simple. Final. Inarguable. She filed for divorce, the papers ready to be served the Monday after Richard's birthday. And she watched her husband plan his celebration with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. "My mother called again," Richard said one evening, 2 weeks before the party. "She wanted to know about the menu. I told her you had everything under control." "Of course," Margaret said. "She is particularly looking forward to the dumplings." Richard chuckled. "She says no one makes them like you do." Margaret thought about Eleanor Chen, her mother-in-law. A sharp-eyed woman who had always treated Margaret with courtesy if not warmth. A woman who understood the work Margaret did even if Richard did not. "I will not disappoint her," Margaret said. She would not. Eleanor's disappointment would be directed at the right person. The week before the birthday, Richard was in especially good spirits. The company was doing well. Victoria was being satisfying. His family was gathering to celebrate his success. He looked at Margaret one evening and frowned slightly. "You seem different lately. More confident." Margaret smiled. "You told me to be independent. I have been practicing." Richard laughed, pleased with himself. "See, I knew you just needed a push." He did not notice the look in her eyes. He did not see the woman who had transformed beneath his roof while he was too busy with his mistress to pay attention. He saw only what he expected to see. A wife. A servant. Nothing that mattered. 2 days before the party, while Richard was at work, Margaret loaded the last of her belongings into a rental truck. The house looked almost the same when she was done. She had been careful. She had left enough behind that a casual glance would notice nothing different. But someone paying close attention would see the gaps. The shelves that were slightly emptier. The closets that held fewer clothes. The subtle absence of personal touches that had made the house feel lived in. She drove across town to her new apartment and spent the afternoon unpacking. Her furniture, recovered from storage. Her books arranged on shelves. Her grandmother's quilt spread across her bed. When she was done, she stood in the middle of her living room and allowed herself to feel what she had suppressed for months. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. This was hers. Every square foot of this apartment, every item in it, every choice that had gone into creating it. Hers alone. That evening, she returned to the Chen mansion one last time. Richard was out, probably with Victoria. The house was empty. Margaret walked through each room slowly, saying goodbye. The kitchen where she had prepared thousands of meals. The dining room where she had hosted countless dinners. The bedroom where she had slept beside a man who had stopped seeing her years ago. She felt no sadness. Only closure. She sat at Richard's desk and wrote her note. She placed it on his desk where he would find it in the morning. Beside it, she left her house keys, her credit cards, and after a long moment of consideration, her wedding ring. The ring caught the light from the desk lamp. 25 years of marriage reduced to a small circle of gold. Margaret looked at it one last time. Then she walked out of the house, locking the door behind her, and drove to her new life. The night before Richard's birthday, Margaret slept better than she had in years. She woke early, made herself breakfast in her own kitchen, and watched the morning news while drinking coffee from a mug she had chosen herself. Her phone was off. She had changed her number the day before, leaving no way for Richard to reach her. He would try, she knew. He would call and text and demand explanations. But she was done explaining herself to a man who had never listened. Around 10 in the morning, she imagined him waking up, reaching for her side of the bed and finding it empty, going downstairs expecting breakfast, finding nothing. She imagined his confusion, then his irritation, then his first flutter of real concern. She imagined him searching the house, checking her closet, noticing for the first time the gaps she had left behind. She imagined him finding her note. Margaret poured herself another cup of coffee and smiled. At the Chen mansion, chaos was unfolding exactly as she had imagined. Richard had woken at 9, later than usual, expecting Margaret to have started preparations hours ago. The smell of cooking should have filled the house. The kitchen should have been alive with her activity. Instead, the house was silent. "Margaret," he called. No answer. He checked the kitchen first. Empty. Cold. No evidence that anyone had cooked anything in days. His heart began to beat faster. He checked the dining room. The table was bare. The chairs were arranged for a party, but there was no tablecloth, no place settings, no indication that a meal would ever be served. He checked her closet. Gaps where her favorite clothes should have been. He checked her bathroom. Her toothbrush was gone. Her face wash, her lotion, all the small items that made a space inhabited. Gone. By the time he found her note, his hands were shaking. He read it 3 times. The words did not change. "As you requested 4 months ago, I am eating my own food. You made clear that I contribute nothing to this household. I have removed my nothing. Happy birthday." The wedding ring caught the light beside the note. Cold metal on dark wood. His phone began ringing. His mother. His brother. His uncle. All of them asking questions he could not answer. "Where is Margaret? What time should we arrive? Do you need us to bring anything?" Richard could not think. He could not process what was happening. Margaret had left him. Actually left him. On his birthday. Right before 40 family members would arrive expecting a celebration he could not provide. He tried calling her. The number was disconnected. He tried texting. The messages failed to send. He tried everything he could think of, and none of it worked. Because Margaret had not simply left. She had disappeared. Completely, thoroughly, strategically. She had planned every detail, and he had noticed nothing. At 2 in the afternoon, the family began to arrive. Richard had considered cancelling. He had picked up his phone a dozen times to send the message. But something stopped him. Pride. Denial. The desperate hope that Margaret would somehow appear and everything would be fine. She did not appear. His mother was the first to arrive. Eleanor Chen walked into the kitchen and stopped, her sharp eyes taking in the empty counters, the cold stove, the absence of everything she had expected. "Richard," she said, her voice dangerous. "What is happening here?" Margaret left a note. Richard's voice sounded strange to his own ears. "She is not coming." Left a note. Eleanor repeated the words slowly. What kind of note? Before Richard could answer, more family arrived. His brother David with his wife. Cousins from out of town. His uncle Bernard, already asking about the braised pork. Richard watched their faces change as they entered the house. Confusion. Concern. Growing suspicion. "Where is the food?" someone asked. "Where is Margaret?" someone else demanded. Richard found himself in the living room, surrounded by 40 people who had come to celebrate him and were now staring at him with expressions ranging from bewilderment to accusation. His mother read the note aloud. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were fire. "You told your wife to eat her own food," Eleanor said when she finished. "After 25 years. After everything she has done for this family." Richard tried to explain. "It came out wrong. Everything came out wrong. I just wanted her to be more independent. To contribute more. I did not think she would actually leave. Contribute more." David's voice was incredulous. "Margaret is the reason half your clients stayed with you. Do you not remember the Morrison account?" Richard blinked. What about the Morrison account? They were going to walk. Everyone knew it. But Margaret spent 3 hours with Eleanor Morrison after her mother died. Sent flowers to the funeral. Called to check on her every week for a month. David shook his head. The contract was signed 2 weeks later. That was not business skill, Richard. That was Margaret. Silence fell. Richard looked around at his family, at the faces that had been so eager to celebrate him an hour ago. Now they looked at him like they were seeing him clearly for the first time. And they did not like what they saw. Uncle Bernard set down the gift he had brought. "I think I should leave," he said quietly. "This is not the celebration I came for." One by one, the family members began to leave. They offered no excuses. They did not say happy birthday. They simply walked out, leaving Richard alone with his mother. Eleanor Chen had not moved. She stood in the center of the living room, holding Margaret's wedding ring in her hand. "Is there someone else?" she asked. "Do not lie to me, Richard. I have known you for 55 years. I will know if you lie." Richard wanted to deny it. He wanted to explain, to justify, to make her understand. But his mother's eyes were unyielding, and he found he could not speak the lie. His silence was answer enough. "I am ashamed of you." Eleanor's voice was quiet but devastating. "I raised you to be better than this. Margaret gave you everything, and you threw her away for what? A woman who will leave you the moment you are no longer useful." She placed the wedding ring on the table beside him. "You deserve to be alone," she said. "I hope you find a way to become someone worth forgiving. But until then, I do not want to see you." She walked out without looking back. Richard sat alone in his empty house, surrounded by decorations for a party that would never happen, holding a wedding ring that would never be worn again. For the first time in his life, he had no idea what to do next. Across town, Margaret was making dinner. She had spent the afternoon arranging her new apartment, hanging pictures, organizing her kitchen, making the space feel like home. Now she stood at her own stove, cooking a meal that was just for her. She had turned off her phone hours ago. She knew what was happening at the Chen mansion. She could imagine Richard's confusion, his panic, his desperate attempts to reach her. She could imagine the family's arrival, their questions, their growing understanding. She felt no satisfaction in his humiliation. That surprised her. She had expected to feel vindicated, triumphant, pleased to see him face consequences for once. Instead, she felt peaceful. Simply, profoundly peaceful. She had spent 25 years pouring herself into a marriage that did not value her. Now she was pouring herself into a life that did. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of cooking. No one was asking her for anything. No one was expecting her service. No one was dismissing her contributions or taking her labor for granted. She was alone, and it was wonderful. Margaret ate her dinner at her small table, looking out the window at the city lights. She thought about all the years she had spent eating meals she had prepared for someone else, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. Now she ate her own food, in her own home, in a life she had built with her own hands. And it was delicious. But as the evening wore on and the peace settled deeper into her bones, Margaret found herself thinking about what came next. The divorce papers would be served on Monday. Richard would receive them and finally understand that this was permanent. And then the real work would begin. Building her career. Establishing her independence. Becoming the person she might have been if she had not spent 25 years in someone else's shadow. She did not know exactly what that person would look like. She was 52 years old, and she was just beginning to find out. The thought terrified her. It also thrilled her. Margaret cleaned her dishes, prepared for bed, and fell asleep in her new bedroom under her grandmother's quilt. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, her real life would begin. What she did not know was that Richard's troubles were only beginning. The financial irregularities she had documented were about to be discovered by others. Victoria was about to reveal her true motivations. The empire Richard had built on foundations of arrogance and dishonesty was about to start crumbling. And in the aftermath of that collapse, Margaret would face a choice she had not anticipated. A chance to rebuild not just her own life, but something larger. Something that would transform everything she thought she knew about her past, her future, and what it truly means to find your worth. But that is a story for another time. For now, she slept. Peacefully. Completely. Free. He woke each morning in a house that felt like a mausoleum. The silence was oppressive. For 25 years, he had woken to the sounds of Margaret moving through the kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing, the quiet rhythm of a home being cared for. Now there was nothing. Just empty rooms and the echo of his own footsteps. He tried calling her number dozens of times. Disconnected. He sent emails that bounced back. He even drove to her sister's house, but Grace met him at the door with an expression that stopped him cold. "She does not want to see you," Grace said. "And honestly, Richard, I do not blame her. Please." Richard heard the desperation in his own voice and hated it. "Just tell me where she is. I need to explain." "Explain what?" Grace crossed her arms. That you told her she was worthless. That you cheated on her for over a year. That you treated her like a servant instead of a wife. Richard felt the ground shift beneath him. How did she know about the affair? Margaret must have found out. Must have known for longer than he realized. I made mistakes, he said. I know that now. Grace laughed, but there was no humor in it. You do not know anything, Richard. You never did. Margaret spent 25 years making your life perfect, and you could not even see her. She was invisible to you. And now she is invisible to everyone, because she chose to be. She chose freedom over you. The door closed in his face. Richard drove home through streets that seemed different somehow. Smaller. Less impressive. The city he had conquered felt foreign now, like a country where he no longer spoke the language. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. When can I see you? I miss you. Richard stared at the message. A week ago, those words would have thrilled him. Victoria was everything Margaret was not. Ambitious. Independent. Exciting. Now the words felt hollow. Empty calories when he was starving for something real. He did not respond. At home, he tried to make himself dinner. He had not cooked in years. Margaret had always handled meals, had always ensured he was fed and comfortable. Now he stood in his gourmet kitchen, surrounded by equipment he did not know how to use, and realized he could not even make toast without burning it. He ordered delivery and ate alone at the dining room table set for 40. The next morning, Richard went to work and tried to lose himself in business. Chen Hospitality Group was his creation, his legacy, his proof that he mattered. Whatever was happening in his personal life, at least he still had this. His assistant met him at the elevator with an expression he did not like. Mr. Chen, the board has called an emergency meeting. They are waiting for you in the conference room. Richard frowned. I do not have a board meeting scheduled today. It was called this morning. His assistant would not meet his eyes. They said it was urgent. The walk to the conference room felt longer than usual. Richard straightened his tie, composed his face, prepared to handle whatever minor crisis had prompted this interruption. He was not prepared for what he found. The full board was assembled. 12 faces, none of them friendly. At the head of the table sat Harrison Webb, the chairman, a man Richard had considered an ally for 15 years. Richard, Harrison said. Please sit down. Richard Saturday. The silence stretched. We have received some concerning information, Harrison continued, about financial irregularities within the company. Specifically, irregularities connected to your personal accounts. Richard felt his stomach drop. What kind of irregularities? Large sums moved through subsidiary accounts. Expenses that do not match any legitimate business purpose. Transactions that appear designed to obscure their true nature. Harrison slid a folder across the table. Our forensic accountants have been reviewing the books for the past week. What they found is troubling. Richard opened the folder. The pages blurred before his eyes. Account numbers. Transfer dates. Dollar amounts. All of it meticulously documented, all of it damning. He had been careful. He had thought he was careful. But someone had been more careful still. Where did this come from? Richard asked, his voice hoarse. An anonymous source provided initial documentation that prompted the internal review. Harrison's expression was unreadable. The source appears to have had detailed access to your personal financial records. Margaret. It had to be Margaret. She had been paying attention all those years. She had been watching, documenting, preparing. He had told her she contributed nothing. He had dismissed her as useless. And she had been building a case against him the entire time. Richard, Harrison said, we need your resignation. Effective immediately. The words landed like physical blows. You cannot do this. Richard's voice rose. I built this company. I created everything we have. You cannot just push me out. We are not pushing you out. We are protecting the company from the legal exposure your actions have created. Harrison stood, and the other board members stood with him. You have two choices. Resign quietly with a modest severance package, or we terminate you for cause and report everything to the authorities. Your decision. Richard looked around the room at the faces of people he had worked with for years. People who had praised him, celebrated him, called him visionary. Now they looked at him like he was a liability to be managed. He thought about fighting. He thought about lawyers and counterattacks and the weapons he could deploy. But he was tired. So tired. "I will resign," he said. The paperwork was completed within the hour. Security escorted him from the building with a box of personal items and instructions not to return. 25 years of building an empire, and it took less than 60 minutes to dismantle his place in it. He sat in his car in the parking garage and stared at nothing. His phone buzzed. "Victoria again. I heard what happened. Are you okay? Can I come over tonight?" Richard looked at the message for a long time. Then he typed a response. "I need to see you. Come to my house at 7. Victoria arrived at 7:15, letting herself in with the key Richard had given her months ago. She was dressed beautifully, as always, her confidence evident in every movement. Richard was sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey he had not touched. The house was dark except for a single lamp. "There you are." Victoria's voice was warm as she crossed to him. "I have been so worried." "What happened at the board meeting?" "I was forced to resign." Victoria's expression flickered. Just for a moment. But Richard had spent 25 years failing to read one woman. He was not going to make the same mistake twice. He saw the calculation in her eyes. The rapid reassessment. The shifting of priorities. "That is terrible," she said, but her voice was different now. Lighter. Less invested. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know." Richard watched her carefully. "There will probably be an investigation. Criminal charges are possible." Criminal charges. Victoria took a step back. "Richard, that is serious." "I know." Silence fell between them. It was not a comfortable silence. It was the silence of two people realizing they had less in common than they thought. "Victoria," Richard said slowly, "why are you with me?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what attracted you to me? What made you want to pursue this relationship?" Victoria laughed, but it sounded forced. "Richard, this is not the time for philosophical questions. You have just lost your job. Humor me." She studied him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. A hardening. A decision made. "I was attracted to your power," she said. "Your success. The way you commanded rooms and made things happen. You were the most important person at Chen Hospitality Group. You were going places. And now that I am not." Victoria did not answer. She did not need to. Richard nodded slowly. "I thought so." "Richard, do not make this into something it is not." Victoria's voice was defensive now. "We had fun together. We had chemistry. That does not disappear just because your circumstances have changed. But it does it not?" Richard finally picked up his whiskey and took a long drink. "You are not here because you love me. You are here because you loved what I represented. And now that I represent failure and criminal liability, you are trying to figure out how to exit gracefully. That is not fair. It is completely fair. It is also honest." Richard stood and walked to the window. "Margaret loved me when I had nothing. When my office was our dining room table and our biggest client was her uncle's friend doing us a favor. She loved me before I was successful." Victoria was silent. "You never loved me at all," Richard continued. "You loved the idea of me. The powerful CEO, the wealthy husband, the ticket to a better life. And I was so flattered by your attention that I threw away someone who actually cared about me." He turned to face her. "I think you should leave." Victoria's expression hardened. "Fine. But do not pretend you were some innocent victim in this, Richard. You pursued me. You complained about your boring wife and your passionless marriage. You wanted excitement, and I gave it to you. I know." Richard's voice was tired. "I know exactly what I did. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." Victoria picked up her purse and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "For what it is worth," she said. "I am sorry things turned out this way." "No, you are not. But thank you for saying it." The door closed behind her, and Richard was alone again. He finished his whiskey and poured another. He thought about Margaret, about the years they had shared, about all the moments he had failed to appreciate. He thought about the morning she had made his coffee and the evening she had prepared his dinner and the countless small acts of love he had dismissed as nothing. He had been so certain of his own importance. So confident that he was the one who mattered, the one who built things, the one who deserved credit. Now he sat in an empty house with no job, no wife, no mistress, and no idea who he was without all the things he had lost. The criminal investigation began 3 weeks later. Richard hired lawyers, expensive ones, and they managed to negotiate a deal. He would plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for cooperation. He would pay substantial fines and restitution. He would serve no jail time, but he would have a record. A permanent reminder of what he had done. The news coverage was brutal. Richard Chen, hospitality mogul, faces fraud charges. The rise and fall of Chen Hospitality Group. Former CEO admits to financial crimes. His photograph appeared in business publications that had once celebrated his success. Now they dissected his failure with the same enthusiasm. Richard stopped reading the articles. He stopped watching the news. He stopped doing much of anything except sitting in his increasingly empty house, watching his life disintegrate. The mansion went next. He could not afford the mortgage without his salary and bonuses. The bank was remarkably unsympathetic to his circumstances. Within 2 months, he received notice of foreclosure. He moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen the size of his old pantry. It was clean and adequate and utterly humiliating. His mother called once. "I heard about the legal troubles," Eleanor said. "I am not surprised." "Mother, I did not call to be lectured. I did not call to lecture you. I called to tell you that I am selling your father's business to David. He will run it better than you ever did." Richard felt the words like a knife. "Father left that business to me, and you have proven yourself unworthy of it." Eleanor's voice was cold. "David has integrity. David treats people with respect. David has been married to the same woman for 22 years and has never once made her feel worthless." "Mother, please. I am not finished." Eleanor took a breath. "I love you, Richard. You are my son, and I will always love you. But I do not like you right now. I do not respect you. And until you become someone worth respecting, I think it is best if we limit our contact." The phone went silent. Richard sat in his small apartment, surrounded by boxes he had not unpacked, and felt the full weight of everything he had lost. His company, his money, his family, his wife, his mistress, his reputation, his self-respect. He had spent 55 years believing he was exceptional, believing he deserved everything he had achieved, believing that the people around him existed to serve his needs and ambitions. Now he was alone, and there was no one left to blame but himself. That night, he made himself dinner. Pasta with sauce from a jar. It was not good, but he ate it anyway. He washed his own dishes and put them away in cabinets that were mostly empty. He thought about Margaret eating her own food in her own apartment, building her own life. He thought about how peaceful she must feel. How free. He envied her that freedom. He envied her the clarity of knowing who she was without him. Richard did not know who he was anymore, but he was starting to realize that finding out might be the most important work he had ever done. He found a therapist. A patient woman named Dr. Yolanda Richards, who listened without judgment as he told her about his marriage, his affair, his downfall. "Why do you think you treated Margaret that way?" she asked during their 3rd session. "I do not know." Richard stared at his hands. "I think I stopped seeing her. She was always there, always handling things, and I just started taking it for granted. Like she was part of the furniture. And the affair." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "I think I wanted to feel important. Wanted to feel like I was still exciting, still desirable. Victoria made me feel that way. And Margaret did not." "No." He paused. "Or maybe she did, and I was too blind to notice. She was always there. Always supportive. Always taking care of things. I mistook reliability for boring." Dr. Richards nodded. "That is a common mistake. We often fail to appreciate stability until we lose it. I thought I was the special one. Richard's voice cracked. I thought I was the one who made everything work. But it was her. It was always her. What do you want to do with that realization? Richard looked up. What do you mean? I mean, now that you understand what you lost, what do you want to do? Do you want to try to win her back? Do you want to apologize? Do you want to move on? Richard thought about it. Really thought about it. I want her to be happy, he said finally. Whether that includes me or not. I spent 25 years making her miserable without even realizing it. The least I can do now is hope she found something better. And for yourself. For myself. Richard took a deep breath. I want to become someone who deserves forgiveness. Even if I never receive it. Across the city, Margaret was becoming exactly the person she had always hoped to be. The Harrington had become her home in ways she had not expected. Not just a workplace, but a community of people who valued her, who saw her contributions, who treated her like she mattered. Patricia had become a mentor and friend. She invited Margaret to industry events, introduced her to influential people, championed her work at every opportunity. This is Margaret Chen, Patricia would say. The best client relations director in the business. We are lucky to have her. Margaret Chen. She had kept the name, not out of loyalty to Richard, but because it was hers now. She had earned it through 25 years of invisible labor. She was not going to let his failures take it from her. 6 months after leaving Richard, Margaret landed her first major account independently. The Morrison family, the same clients whose business she had saved years ago without credit, came to her directly. We heard you were at the Harrington, Eleanor Morrison said during their meeting. We have been hoping to work with you. Not with Chen Hospitality. With you specifically. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. You remember that? I remember everything. Eleanor's voice was warm. The flowers you sent when my mother died. The calls to check on me. The way you always remembered that my daughter was allergic to shellfish and my husband hated small talk. She smiled. That is not something a company does, Margaret. That is something a person does. And we want to work with you. The Morrison account was worth $2 million annually. Margaret negotiated the contract herself, presented it to Patricia, and watched her mentor's face light up with pride. I knew I was right about you, Patricia said. You are going to run this place someday. Margaret laughed. I just want to do good work. That is why you will run this place someday. The success felt different than she had expected. Not triumphant or vengeful, but quiet and satisfying. Like finally being seen after years of invisibility. She decorated her apartment with things she loved. Bright colors that Richard had always dismissed as garish. Plants that filled her windows with green. Photographs of her family, her friends, her life. She reconnected with people she had lost touch with during her marriage. College friends who had drifted away. Colleagues from her brief career before Richard. Her sister Grace, who had always been there but who Margaret had kept at a distance to protect Richard's image. I am sorry, Margaret told Grace over dinner one evening. For all the times I defended him. For all the times I made excuses. For all the years I was not fully present because I was so focused on being his wife. Grace took her hand. You are here now. That is what matters. The divorce was finalized 8 months after Margaret left. She requested nothing. No alimony, no assets, no piece of the empire she had helped build. Her lawyer thought she was crazy. You could get millions, Helen argued. You have documented evidence of his affair, his fraud, his treatment of you. Any judge in the country would award you substantial compensation. I do not want his money. Margaret's voice was calm. I want my freedom. That is worth more than anything he could give me. Helen shook her head but processed the paperwork. Richard signed without protest. Margaret heard later that he had not even hired a lawyer to negotiate. He just signed whatever was put in front of him, as if he knew he had no right to ask for anything. The final papers arrived on a Tuesday. Margaret opened them at her kitchen table, read through the legal language confirming that her marriage was officially over, and felt nothing but relief. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on her balcony, watching the city lights come on. 25 years, she thought. 25 years of her life, reduced to a stack of legal documents and a signature. But that was not true, was it? Those 25 years had made her who she was. The patience she had developed, the skills she had honed, the strength she had built. All of it had come from surviving a marriage that did not value her. She was not grateful for the pain. But she was grateful for who she had become because of it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Industry awards next month. I am nominating you for excellence in client relations. You deserve it. Margaret smiled and typed her response. Thank you. That means everything. She went to bed that night feeling something she had not felt in decades. Complete. The year that followed was the best of Margaret's life. She received the Excellence in Client Relations Award, standing on stage in front of industry leaders who had once known her only as Richard Chen's wife. Her acceptance speech was brief and heartfelt. I want to thank everyone who saw what I could be before I saw it myself, she said. And I want to thank myself for finally having the courage to find out. The applause was genuine and sustained. Margaret looked out at the audience and felt the validation she had been seeking for 25 years. Not from a husband who would never appreciate her, but from herself. Her career continued to flourish. She was promoted to Vice President of Client Relations, then Senior Vice President. Patricia began talking about succession planning, about Margaret eventually taking over the Harrington. I am not going anywhere for a few more years, Patricia assured her. But when I do retire, I want to know this place is in good hands. Your hands. Margaret did not know what to say. A year ago, she had been making coffee for a husband who called her worthless. Now she was being groomed to run a luxury hotel. Life could change so quickly. She was proof of that. She also met someone. His name was James Morrison, no relation to the Morrison family she worked with. He was an architect who specialized in historic renovation, a quiet man with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. They met at an industry conference, bonding over shared complaints about the catering. Their first date was coffee that turned into dinner that turned into a walk through the city that ended at midnight. James was nothing like Richard. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He remembered details she mentioned in passing and brought them up weeks later. He was interested in her opinions, her experiences, her perspective on the world. Their relationship developed slowly. Neither of them was in a hurry. They had both been married before, both been hurt, both learned caution. I am not looking for someone to complete me, Margaret told him during one of their early dates. I already know who I am. I am looking for someone to share that with. James smiled. That is exactly what I want too. I mean, now that you understand what you lost, what do you want to do? Do you want to try to win her back? Do you want to apologize? Do you want to move on? Richard thought about it. Really thought about it. I want her to be happy, he said finally. Whether that includes me or not. I spent 25 years making her miserable without even realizing it. The least I can do now is hope she found something better. And for yourself. For myself. Richard took a deep breath. I want to become someone who deserves forgiveness. Even if I never receive it. Across the city, Margaret was becoming exactly the person she had always hoped to be. The Harrington had become her home in ways she had not expected. Not just a workplace, but a community of people who valued her, who saw her contributions, who treated her like she mattered. Patricia had become a mentor and friend. She invited Margaret to industry events, introduced her to influential people, championed her work at every opportunity. This is Margaret Chen, Patricia would say. The best client relations director in the business. We are lucky to have her. Margaret Chen. She had kept the name, not out of loyalty to Richard, but because it was hers now. She had earned it through 25 years of invisible labor. She was not going to let his failures take it from her. 6 months after leaving Richard, Margaret landed her first major account independently. The Morrison family, the same clients whose business she had saved years ago without credit, came to her directly. We heard you were at the Harrington, Eleanor Morrison said during their meeting. We have been hoping to work with you. Not with Chen Hospitality. With you specifically. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. You remember that. I remember everything. Eleanor's voice was warm. The flowers you sent when my mother died. The calls to check on me. The way you always remembered that my daughter was allergic to shellfish and my husband hated small talk. She smiled. That is not something a company does, Margaret. That is something a person does. And we want to work with you. The Morrison account was worth $2 million annually. Margaret negotiated the contract herself, presented it to Patricia, and watched her mentor's face light up with pride. I knew I was right about you, Patricia said. You are going to run this place someday. Margaret laughed. I just want to do good work. That is why you will run this place someday. The success felt different than she had expected. Not triumphant or vengeful, but quiet and satisfying. Like finally being seen after years of invisibility. She decorated her apartment with things she loved. Bright colors that Richard had always dismissed as garish. Plants that filled her windows with green. Photographs of her family, her friends, her life. She reconnected with people she had lost touch with during her marriage. College friends who had drifted away. Colleagues from her brief career before Richard. Her sister Grace, who had always been there but who Margaret had kept at a distance to protect Richard's image. I am sorry, Margaret told Grace over dinner one evening. For all the times I defended him. For all the times I made excuses. For all the years I was not fully present because I was so focused on being his wife. Grace took her hand. You are here now. That is what matters. The divorce was finalized 8 months after Margaret left. She requested nothing. No alimony, no assets, no piece of the empire she had helped build. Her lawyer thought she was crazy. You could get millions, Helen argued. You have documented evidence of his affair, his fraud, his treatment of you. Any judge in the country would award you substantial compensation. I do not want his money. Margaret's voice was calm. I want my freedom. That is worth more than anything he could give me. Helen shook her head but processed the paperwork. Richard signed without protest. Margaret heard later that he had not even hired a lawyer to negotiate. He just signed whatever was put in front of him, as if he knew he had no right to ask for anything. The final papers arrived on a Tuesday. Margaret opened them at her kitchen table, read through the legal language confirming that her marriage was officially over, and felt nothing but relief. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on her balcony, watching the city lights come on. 25 years, she thought. 25 years of her life, reduced to a stack of legal documents and a signature. But that was not true, was it? Those 25 years had made her who she was. The patience she had developed, the skills she had honed, the strength she had built. All of it had come from surviving a marriage that did not value her. She was not grateful for the pain. But she was grateful for who she had become because of it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Industry awards next month. I am nominating you for excellence in client relations. You deserve it. Margaret smiled and typed her response. Thank you. That means everything. She went to bed that night feeling something she had not felt in decades. Complete. The year that followed was the best of Margaret's life. She received the Excellence in Client Relations Award, standing on stage in front of industry leaders who had once known her only as Richard Chen's wife. Her acceptance speech was brief and heartfelt. I want to thank everyone who saw what I could be before I saw it myself, she said. And I want to thank myself for finally having the courage to find out. The applause was genuine and sustained. Margaret looked out at the audience and felt the validation she had been seeking for 25 years. Not from a husband who would never appreciate her, but from herself. Her career continued to flourish. She was promoted to Vice President of Client Relations, then Senior Vice President. Patricia began talking about succession planning, about Margaret eventually taking over the Harrington. I'm not going anywhere for a few more years, Patricia assured her. But when I do retire, I want to know this place is in good hands. Your hands. Margaret did not know what to say. A year ago, she had been making coffee for a husband who called her worthless. Now she was being groomed to run a luxury hotel. Life could change so quickly. She was proof of that. She also met someone. His name was James Morrison, no relation to the Morrison family she worked with. He was an architect who specialized in historic renovation, a quiet man with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. They met at an industry conference, bonding over shared complaints about the catering. Their first date was coffee that turned into dinner that turned into a walk through the city that ended at midnight. James was nothing like Richard. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He remembered details she mentioned in passing and brought them up weeks later. He was interested in her opinions, her experiences, her perspective on the world. Their relationship developed slowly. Neither of them was in a hurry. They had both been married before, both been hurt, both learned caution. "I am not looking for someone to complete me," Margaret told him during one of their early dates. "I already know who I am. I am looking for someone to share that with." James smiled. "That is exactly what I want too." They did not move in together. They did not rush toward marriage. They simply spent time together, building something real and lasting, brick by careful brick. Margaret found that she liked this pace. She liked having her own space, her own life, her own identity. She liked choosing to be with James rather than needing him. For the first time in her life, she was in a relationship between equals. And it was wonderful. The encounter with Richard happened on an ordinary Saturday, 18 months after Margaret had left. She was at the grocery store, selecting vegetables for a dinner party she was hosting. Her apartment had become known among her friends for good food and warm company. She loved cooking now that she was cooking for people who appreciated it. She was reaching for the tomatoes when she heard a voice she knew as well as her own. "Margaret." She turned, and there he was. Richard Chen, looking older than she remembered. His clothes were simple, not the designer suits he used to wear. His posture was different too. Less commanding. More uncertain. "Richard." Her voice was neutral, neither warm nor cold. They stood in the produce section, two people who had shared a life for a quarter century, now strangers. "You look well," Richard said. "I saw the coverage of your award. Congratulations." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. Other shoppers moved around them, oblivious to the history contained in this moment. "I have been wanting to talk to you," Richard said. "I have been wanting to apologize." Margaret studied his face. She saw the changes. The lines that had deepened. The grey that had spread. The humility that had replaced the arrogance she remembered. "I have been in therapy," Richard continued. "Trying to understand myself. Trying to understand how I became someone who could treat you the way I did." He paused. "I was wrong, Margaret. About everything. About what you contributed, about what we built together, about who I was without you." Margaret listened without interrupting. She had imagined this conversation many times. Had scripted responses, planned what she would say when he finally acknowledged what he had done. But now that the moment was here, she found she did not need any of those scripts. "I believe you," she said simply. "I believe you are sorry. And I am glad you are doing the work to understand yourself." Richard's eyes lit with hope. "Does that mean we could try again? Could we talk, maybe have dinner, see if there is anything left?" "No." The word was gentle but absolute. Richard's face fell. "I am not saying that to punish you," Margaret continued. "I am not angry anymore. I am not bitter. I genuinely hope you find happiness and become the person you are trying to be. But not with me." Richard nodded slowly. "Because of what I did. Because of who I became after you did it." Margaret's voice was calm and certain. "I built a life, Richard. A real life with work I love and people who value me and a future I am excited about. That life does not include you. Not because I hate you, but because I have moved on." She saw him struggling with this, wanting to argue, wanting to convince her. But he did not. Perhaps the therapy was working after all. "I understand," he said quietly. "I do not like it, but I understand." "I hope you find what you are looking for," Margaret said. "I really do." She placed her selected vegetables in her basket and smiled at him. It was a kind smile, free of malice or triumph. "Goodbye, Richard." She walked away without looking back. She did not need to. The past was behind her, and she was walking toward the future. That evening, Margaret hosted her dinner party. 8 friends gathered around her table, laughing and talking and enjoying food she had prepared with care. James was there, helping her in the kitchen, moving around her with easy familiarity. "You seem lighter tonight," he observed. "Did something happen?" I ran into Richard at the grocery store. Margaret continued chopping vegetables without looking up. He apologized. How do you feel about that? Margaret considered the question carefully. She thought about all the years she had spent hoping for exactly this moment. Hoping Richard would see her, appreciate her, acknowledge what she had given him. Now that it had happened, she found it mattered less than she expected. I feel like I have already moved on, she said. His apology does not change anything. It does not undo what happened or make those years easier. But it also does not upset me or reopen old wounds. It just is. James nodded. That sounds like healing. Margaret smiled. I think it is. The dinner party was a success. Friends lingered late into the evening, reluctant to leave the warmth of Margaret's hospitality. When the last guest finally departed, Margaret and James stood together on her balcony, looking at the city lights. This is a good life, James said. The one you have built. It is. Margaret leaned into his warmth. It took me 52 years to find it. But yes. It is a very good life. Do you ever regret the years you spent with Richard? Margaret thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. I regret not leaving sooner, she said finally. I regret not valuing myself enough to demand better treatment. But I do not regret the years themselves. They made me who I am. They taught me patience and resilience and the importance of knowing my own worth. She turned to face James. If I had left Richard at 40, or 30, or even at 25 before we married, I would not be standing here right now. I would not have this career, these friends, this apartment, this life. She smiled. I would not have you. James kissed her forehead gently. For what it is worth, I am glad you are standing here right now. So am I. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of a city full of people living their own complicated lives. Margaret thought about all the other women out there who might be standing in the kitchens of their own lives, preparing meals for husbands who did not see them, wondering if this was all there was. She wished she could tell them what she had learned. That it was never too late to start over. That their worth was not determined by anyone else's opinion. That eating your own food, prepared with your own hands, in a life you built yourself, was the most delicious meal you would ever taste. But those were lessons each person had to learn for themselves. The best she could do was live her truth and hope it inspired others to find their own. I should go, James said reluctantly. Early meeting tomorrow. Stay. The word came out before Margaret could stop it. If you want to. James smiled. Are you sure? I am sure. They went inside together, and Margaret closed the balcony door on the night and the past and everything that no longer served her. The final scene of Margaret's transformation happened 6 months later, on the second anniversary of the day she left Richard. She woke early, as she often did now, and made herself coffee in her own kitchen. The morning light streamed through windows she had chosen, falling on furniture she had selected, illuminating a life she had built from nothing. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago. Standing in Richard's kitchen, reading his cruel words, feeling something break inside her. She thought about the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that she was making the right choice. She had been making the right choice. Every step since then had confirmed it. Margaret got dressed and went to work. The Harrington was hosting a major industry conference, and she was the keynote speaker. Her topic was the art of being seen, building authentic connections in hospitality. She stood at the podium and looked out at an audience of hundreds. Industry leaders. Rising professionals. People who had come specifically to hear what she had to say. For most of my career, Margaret began, I was invisible. I worked behind the scenes, making other people successful, receiving no credit for my contributions. I was told that what I did was not valuable. That anyone could do it. That I was dead weight being carried by someone more important. She paused, letting the words settle. I believed it. For 25 years, I believed I was worthless because someone I trusted told me I was. And then one day, I decided to stop believing. I decided to find out what I could become if I valued myself as much as I valued everyone else. Margaret looked out at the audience, at the faces watching her with attention and respect. What I learned is this. The work we do to make others feel seen is valuable. The relationships we build, the details we remember, the care we take. These are not small things. They are the foundation of everything meaningful in business and in life. She smiled. I also learned that the most important relationship you will ever have is with yourself. If you do not value yourself, no one else will. If you do not believe in your worth, you will accept treatment that confirms your own low opinion. She took a breath. So my message to all of you is simple. See yourself clearly. Know your value. And never let anyone tell you that you are worthless. Because you are not. You are the sum of every kindness you have shown, every connection you have built, every person you have made feel valued. And that is worth more than any title or salary or recognition this industry can offer. The applause was thunderous. Margaret stood at the podium, accepting it, feeling the validation wash over her. But unlike 2 years ago, she did not need it to know who she was. She knew already. The applause was just confirmation of what she had learned to believe about herself. After the conference, Margaret returned home. James was waiting with flowers and champagne. I watched your speech online, he said, pulling her into a hug. You were magnificent. I was honest. Margaret took the flowers and smiled. That is all I know how to be anymore. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them, with good food and good wine and conversation that flowed easily. Margaret looked around her apartment, at the life she had created, and felt a peace that went deeper than happiness. She thought about Richard, alone in his small apartment, trying to become someone worth respecting. She wished him well. Genuinely, sincerely wished him well. Not because she had forgiven him, but because she had moved so far beyond the hurt that it no longer mattered. She thought about the phrase that had changed everything. Eat your own food. Richard had meant it as an insult, as a way of dismissing her and diminishing her value. She had turned it into a declaration of independence. That night, after James had fallen asleep, Margaret got up and walked to her kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the window, looking out at the city. She thought about all the meals she had prepared over the years. The breakfast she had made for Richard without thanks. The dinners she had served to clients who did not know she existed. The elaborate feasts she had created for family gatherings where she received no credit. And she thought about the meals she made now. For herself. For James. For friends who appreciated her hospitality. Meals prepared with love and served with joy and eaten with gratitude. The food tasted better now. Everything tasted better now. Margaret finished her water and returned to bed. She curled up beside James, feeling his warmth, hearing his steady breathing, knowing that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had eaten her own food. She had prepared it with her own hands, in a kitchen she had chosen, in a life she had built. And it was delicious. The end.